Okay, so I have a local Business Central 15 container here to do the demo on, but obviously we publish Clever Landing Costs into AppSource for use with SaaS tenants, as well as we're happy to provide the actual .app file for on-premise customers. So first of all, we need to be able to define the different types of costs that we expect to incur when importing goods. I've got a couple that are set up here, one duty and freight, and each of those has a corresponding calculation type. For duty, that is a percentage of the base cost of the item, but that percentage can also include, if appropriate, the sum of other costs. So I'll explain that a little bit later, but so that's the duty, which is a percentage value. We can calculate by volume or by weight, however your freight forwarder prices, either in kilograms or maybe meters cubed. So in this example, I've got freight, which is priced per kilogram, and I've ticked that to be included in the duty calculation. So the duty cost on an item will also include the element of freight cost. And I've got a couple of accounts in the GL per landed cost type. One is the accrual account. When we receive goods, the expected cost of this landed cost type will go into that account. And then when the landed cost is actually invoiced, we receive the invoice for the duty or the freight. That will be reversed out of the accrual account, and any variance from the expected will be posted into the variance account. Okay, so that's the general setup of the types. If I go on to an item itself, I've got a couple of items I've created this morning. So first of all, we have added a new base cost field under costs and posting. This is the cost from which the duty percentage will be taken. And then sat underneath the item, we've got a couple of landed costs. So now specific to this one item, we have a freight landing cost type, which, as we saw, is calculated by a per kilogram price. And I've entered the per kilogram price as 25. Given that the unit weight is 1.1, the expected freight cost for each base quantity of this item per one of this item is 27.5. Then, given that the duty percentage is 4%, which can be inherited from the tariff that you assign to the item as well, 4% of the base cost plus the freight cost, because that is set to include in duty, comes to an expected 3.1. So now this item is ready to purchase. We've got the costs we're expecting to incur, and we know the cost per unit that we are expecting as well. So when that item is included on a purchase order, and let's open up this one. Got a couple of lines on here, and if I view line document landed costs, this information is not editable from the purchase order, but it's here for information to show that we've pulled through those expected costs and the default cost in your local base, in your local currency per base unit of measure, behind the purchase line, and similarly for item 1001, which I've also created some different costs on that. We allow you to create a container record. I've just called it 3 in this case, but obviously you probably use the actual shipping container number to refer to it by. And either you can enter the correct container number straight onto the purchase line, or some of our customers, actually their vendors will take several purchase orders and cram as much into one shipping container as they can. And then when they send the confirmation of shipment, the customers come into the container record and the container covers several purchase orders. So alternatively, you can come in here, select one or more lines, and then say that you're going to assign this container number to those purchase lines. It's important that that's done up front, because the container number will then be posted onto the landed cost ledger entries, which we're going to see in a second. And later on, when you receive an invoice for the freight of that container, we'll be able to go and find the landed cost entries which were generated by this container number. So I've got the purchase order, I've got the container number set there, I've got the document landed costs sat behind those purchase lines, and I'll now go ahead and receive these goods. And if I navigate to that receipt, receiving the goods is the point at which we want to post the accrual into the GL for the costs we're expecting to incur. So you'll see there are 12 GL entries. There's also 4 landed cost ledger entries. There were 2 expected types on both of the 2 purchase lines. So we end up with a 4 here. Stamped with the receipt number, and there's the details, the cost per unit, therefore the cost amount expected. And we followed the design of item ledger entries and value entries pretty closely with the design of landed cost ledger entries. So as long as you have posting expected cost amounts enabled in inventory setup, which, if you're not familiar with it, is this setting here, expected cost posting. That must be turned on if you want to post expected landed costs. Once that is turned on, then we will generate expected cost amount landed cost ledger entries, as you can see here. And then those amounts will sit in the chart of accounts. Obviously, there may be quite some delay between the receipt of the goods and actually being invoiced for the freight and the duty. So that balance must sit somewhere, and you can drill down on the GL entries, got the document number that created these GL entries. Sometime later, then we receive the invoice for the freight. Obviously, you post the invoice for the goods themselves and handle the goods as you would do per standard Business Central. But at some point later, we get an invoice for the freight. Purchase invoices. And I've created a new vendor for freight. Freightco, very imaginatively named. We've added a new column first thing on the purchase invoice sub page to select the landed cost type. So I'm going to choose this as being a freight type, which then pulls through the factor to GL account. This is the account that we are posting to, pulled through from the the landed cost type record. And now we can enter the container number that we're being invoiced for. And what was the value supposed to be? I don't know, that's £2,500 will do for now. I'll check that in a second. And so enter the details as received on the invoice and an invoice number. And then on related information of the line, it's very similar to item charge assignment. We've added a new function, landed cost assignment. So we're looking for freight entries posted with this container number. And I can go and get entries that match. It suggests there are two that look like they might match. And I can select as many of these as is appropriate. So let's go and select both of them. The expected cost is actually 3375, so say OK to that. And now we want to assign the value of the freight invoice across these entries. So suggesting that assignment will use the cost amount expected to apportion the value of the invoice. So 59% and 40%. I'll close that. And so let's call this 3,400. Let's say the cost of freight came in a little more than we were expecting it to. If I post that invoice now, and then that has been posted. And again, if I navigate, then you'll see there are two landed cost ledger entries that have been created for the two freight entries that were selected on the get entries and assignment. So we were expecting 3375. Actually, the cost was 4,000 and was split across those lines, 59 and 40%, as we suggested it should be. That will have created GL entries to reverse the accrual that was previously created when the goods were received. And also it will put, if I just go back to the chart of accounts, so we've got a 25 difference between the expected cost and the actual cost, which will have been left in the freight variance account. And there's the invoice number that it came from. And that is the typical workflow that we are looking to support with this product. So allow you to define the expected cost types, post accrual for them. We have a list page of landed cost ledger entries in the same way that you navigate to a list page of item ledger entries or GL entries. And you can see from here, as well as from the GL, which of these remains open, which of them were closed. So we got a couple of freight entries that were created by a receipt here, and that was the cost amount expected. Those have now been closed in the same way that customer and vendor ledger entries are closed, having closed by invoicing them on these two entries here, and you see the container number there as well. So in a nutshell, that is what the product does. We've got a few more bits of work in the pipeline at the moment, where you can specify the type of container, 20-foot, 40-foot container, we are planning on showing the actual weight and volume of a container, summing up the weight and volume of the items within it. For those customers that are specifying to their vendor, this is what we'd like you to put it in a container, so helping them to know if they're within the limits of that container. And some improvements to helping you find the correct landed cost ledger entries to apply your purchase invoice to. So there's a few more things in the pipeline, and obviously, with it being an app on AppSource, we are committed to maintaining it and improving it, making sure it is always compatible with BC16, which will be out in the spring, and versions thereafter.